All right. Hey, everybody. Great to see so many of you here already. I'll just give everybody a minute to roll on in. Let us know where you're tuning in from. And if you have any issues hearing us throughout, just give us a yell, throw a message down in the chat. Always good to know if something's going wrong on our side. Really excited to be back and kicking off another one of these important conversations. So yeah, as I said, I'll just give it 2 seconds for people to roll on in. I'm sure there's a few rushing back to the office, rushing back to their seats, getting their coffees. So we'll give it 2 secs and then I'll kick things off. But yeah, thank you all again for registering, for finding the time for this. And if you've registered for other sessions that are coming up as well, looking forward to seeing you at those. As you know, this is the launch webinar. So this one is really kicking off the series, the 5-part series run by CFO Tech Stack, all focused on scaling with Xero and answering the question, how far can you go? So for those who may not have come to any of these before, who don't use Mayday, who don't know me, my name's Jack Thiel. I started my career as an auditor at PwC just over 10 years ago. I did a little bit of time in business advisory, working with small business owners, and that was very much at kind of the height of Xero's growth, and have been fortunate enough to work in the accounting tech side of things for the past 6 or so years, in a variety of roles. Today, I'm here kind of in a dual role, and throughout the series in a bit of a dual role as both the APAC commercial lead at Mayday and as the APAC lead for CFO Tech Stack. So yeah, really thrilled to be here today, to be part of this conversation, joined by some amazing people, Andrew from Xero, Mitch from Syft, and Laurel from RSM. So thank you all for joining, and I'll hand over to you all in a second after I do a little bit of a intro to the series monologue to get your introduction so that everyone kind of understands, why it's so awesome to have you here. I guess before we go too far, this series is a follow-on from a series we ran in 2023 called Building an Enterprise Level System with Xero, and then one that we ran in 2024 called Xero for Groups. Both of those series were really well attended. We received fantastic reviews, and a lot of the feedback was, let's have more of these conversations. People are still wondering how far can they go with Xero. So I wanted to actually throw up a very quick poll to understand who's here. So I've just thrown up a poll on, hopefully you see that on your side. Number one is, do you currently use Xero? So if you can just answer that for me. I assume most people here do, given this is kind of the focus of the series, but it's good to know. And then, the size of the group that you operate, just to give us a bit of a gauge as to the scale. So looks like 95% of people here are running Xero, and we've got a good portion of 2 to 5 entity groups, all the way up to more than 30 entities. So awesome, cool. Thank you all for responding to that so quickly. I'll give you just a couple more seconds for anyone who hasn't. But yeah, that's great. So it sounds like everyone's in the right space, in the right room. So I will just end the poll there. Anyone who didn't respond, no stress. Thank you for those who have. We've got about 75% participation on that, which is good. I'll end that. Cool. So yeah, thank you for that. And so to set the scene for today and for the remainder of the series, I want to go back to 2022 when we welcomed our first customer to Mayday. They were an ambitious, multi-entity, multi-region, fast-growing business using Xero, but like many others, kind of in that space, they were struggling a little bit, predominantly with their intercompany processes, and that was kind of weighing them down and slowing down their month-end close process, which was impacting reporting, impacting what the decisions the board was making, and so they were asking themselves, is Xero still right for us? Thankfully, even in our earliest form, we were able to address that pain, solve some of those problems, and that business, which is Arbalest, is still with us today. And more importantly, they're still running on Xero successfully. Since then, and over the past 3 years, we've had the privilege of working with thousands of fast-scaling organizations who have chosen to keep Xero as their core ledger. But in many of the early conversations that we have with them, even today, the same hesitation comes up. Look, we love Xero, but shouldn't we be thinking about an ERP? It's the conventional path after all, and I'm sure it, goes along with the saying nobody ever got fired for hiring IBM. Maybe the finance team equivalent of that is, nobody ever got fired for going to an ERP. But I'm not as confident that that's the case. I'm sure there's been a few bad implementations that have gone wrong. But either way, ERPs do come with massive costs, multi-year rollouts, oftentimes broken customizations, and according to a certain McKinsey report, a failure rate of nearly 70%. So there's reason to avoid them as well. And so I think that's why for so many of you, that's why you're here, because you like Xero and you want to figure out how far can you go on it. So why is this question still coming up? Well, the precedent hasn't necessarily been that visible. We don't see or hear a lot from businesses that have managed to make it work at great scale on Xero. The playbook, what is the playbook? Is there one? What do I follow? What tools do I need to integrate? How do I do it? So, we need to kind of get that playbook out there into the world. And the success stories along with that precedent, to hear from other finance leaders, CFOs who have done it, who have succeeded and lived to tell the tale, but also benefited from it and can kind of talk to their experience in a past life on an ERP versus their life now, scaling on Xero. So we wanted to change that. We wanted to share those stories, those playbooks, the precedent, which is where CFO Tech Stack was born. So CFO Tech Stack is a content and community hub for forward-thinking finance leaders. We have over 4,000 progressive finance leaders part of it at the moment. And throughout CFO Tech Stack, we've seen amazing engagement, as mentioned on a few of those other webinar series, through our weekly newsletter and other areas, such as our Stacks conference that we ran in Sydney in May. So the appetite for this kind of content is undeniable. We know you want more of it. We're going to try and deliver more of it. And hopefully this series is valuable for you all. So yeah, really keen to answer the question. Are you really outgrowing Xero, or maybe have you not just fully unlocked its potential to this stage? So on behalf of CFO Tech Stack, thank you for coming along. Thank you in advance for any of the other sessions that you're joining. And yeah, I'm pleased to be joined by Andrew, Mitch, and Laurel. I might hand over to you all now and try and stop talking as much as possible for the rest of the session. Andrew, maybe to yourself, just for a very quick introduction.
Very briefly, my name's Andrew Hirst. I'm the head of sales here at Xero in Australia. I look after partner success and our national accounts, which is our largest, if you like, 25 national groups of accounting firms across the country. I'm based in Brisbane.
Perfect. Thanks, Andrew. And Mitch.
Hi, everyone. Good to be on here, Jack. I think the background to my role, so being a part of Syft for the past 4.5, 5 years now, I'm sort of living in that consolidation world. So that's my background, being a part of the North American team, Africa, UK, and Australia. So seeing it all play out globally. So I'll try to talk to some of that experience.
Cool. Thanks, Mitch. And Laurel.
Hi, everyone. I'm Laurel, and I'm from RSM, which is a national firm with 32 offices across the country, and I'm based in Sydney. I look after our digital advisory division, which kind of has two parts to it. One is we have a Xero ecosystem implementation practice where we take clients on the journey of adopting Xero or getting more out of Xero. The other part is more of an advisory service, which is around helping clients make decisions around, do they go to an ERP? What ERP do they pick? Or what other solutions might they be able to bring into their ecosystems? And at RSM, we also have got an ERP consulting practice, which does Microsoft Dynamics Business Central and NetSuite.
Cool. Awesome. So yeah, as you can tell, great panel of guests here, and thank you all for finding the time for this conversation. And to Laurel's point, I think a lot of the conversation that we're having is how far can you go on Xero, but we know that the answer to that isn't forever for everyone. We appreciate that there is still going to be a need for ERPs for certain businesses with certain use cases. So we don't want to replace one myth with another. We want to have the conversation around when an ERP actually makes sense for you as well. So yeah, without further ado, I suppose let's kick off the conversation, guys. I'd love to get anyone's, and feel free, maybe Andrew, I can start with you just to kick off the conversation around, when and why do finance teams, businesses start questioning whether they've outgrown Xero? And maybe you can kind of give a little bit of glimpse into why businesses choose Xero to begin, and then we can kind of go from there. Oh, sorry, you're on mute. Andrew, sorry, you're on mute. You're on.
Shocker. No excuse for that in today's age to leave yourself on mute. But people kick off using Xero, and we sort of hang our hat on the fact that it's easy to use. And I don't think any software says we're hard to use, but that's sort of how we differentiate ourselves from the competitors. And usually when you think about Xero as a business, we target small and medium businesses. So those businesses will grow over time. And you may have, say, an example is you have a business that would be having like some really basic trading stock needs. And so they use Xero's inventory function, which is pretty simple. It's one location, one currency, sort of no transfer pricing internally. And as that business grows, the need will grow quite a lot for an example, like with inventory. And very soon they'll find the functionality inside Xero's inventory, it's because it's quite basic, doesn't meet their business needs, which is when we point to a larger part of the ecosystem. And so that's when you can outgrow Xero as just the basic organization to move into a key functionality. A great example in that situation would be CIN7, which is actually, I think, part of your tech stack series later on. Amazing, like a huge application. And it moves well beyond trading stock and more into supply chain management. In terms of finance teams, if like that's running the business, with finance teams, usually comes down to the transaction limits in Xero. So it has got what we call soft transaction limits, which is, if you think on a monthly basis, it's 2,000 bank transactions a month, 1,000 invoices, and 1,000 bills a month. And usually when you start to bump up against those, there's an issue because certain parts of the reporting starts to slow down. Typically, the first report to times out for security purposes, is the BAS report. So when doing a BAS, usually on a larger business, you're probably moving away from quarterly into a monthly BAS, and you find you can't run the BAS because it's starting to time out. You're probably moving a bit beyond Xero's capability. And where they go from there is we start to, and Laurel might talk about this later, we start to batch process certain things. So instead, we had like a bakery that was doing 300 invoices a day. So that made it really hard because we've got to blow out Xero's invoicing function pretty much in the first week on a monthly basis. Instead, you can use a point of sale, kind of like an e-commerce provider that can do 5,000 transactions a day, but you'll get one balance that's taken back to your bank account at the end of that day. So Xero recognizes that as one transaction, not 3,000. So there's ways to batch process that you start to get to the edge of Xero's capabilities. In terms of the soft limits, it doesn't stop automatically. It just slows down. You get poorer and poorer performance, if you like. But it's not necessarily based on turnover. I'd say it's more around functionality, and the workflows are also designed to be more individual transaction based. So clicking OK on our reconciliation screen, 300, 400 times a day, they're just not designed for those sort of workflows. So that's when we start to get a feel, is this right for us? And is there another option, either as an ERP, or do we look at some of the ecosystem to see if we can help with this process?
Yeah, brilliant, Andrew. And Laurel, I'm sure you've had some experience with some of these kinds of businesses that are coming to you and saying maybe they're at those limits or getting to those limits, or potentially there's other pain points or problems they're running into. What does that look like for you, that question?
Yeah, I was going to say, actually, it's interesting. We haven't come across the limit issue in a really long time. That used to be a big consideration for folks. But I think probably what we're seeing now is there's two parts to it. One is that the organizations have either got multiple entities as part of the group, and they need to consolidate, and getting that consolidated reporting or handling of the intercompanies or recharges, or even just streamlining the chart of accounts and tracking categories is a pain point, and they don't think that they can solve it in Xero. So that's the first big one. The other one is probably around the controls. So if we're talking specifically about finance teams, Xero just doesn't, sorry, Andrew, Xero just doesn't have good financial controls built in. So that's usually the driver. And it'll come out of either, an internal or an external audit where they'll have to address some of those control issues, or maybe there's fraud or whatever. So they'll start to actually look into putting in place approval workflows, delegation of authority, matrices in practice, and tightening down. And then there's that conception that you can only do that really on an ERP. So finance teams will think, oh, we've got to start to look there. I think that's changing though. Like the awareness around all of the additional finance applications is much greater than it was a year ago.
Yeah, the approvals turns up a lot with the not-for-profits too. Anywhere there's a bigger propensity for fraud. So usually in a smaller business, the approvals turn up pretty quickly. And there's a great program called Approval Max, if anyone would like to know about that one. I never get complaints about Approval Max. It seems to be universally well received. It's one we usually recommend in that sort of situation.
And I think if we strip back the question a little bit, when and why, like why do finance teams start questioning this? And I think a big part of it is because Xero's got such a strong brand as a small business product, and it is great for small businesses. But it delivers payroll for small businesses, great invoicing for small businesses, bills, expenses for small businesses, a great bank feed for small businesses, and a fantastic GL. And I think, in talking to a few people who might be listening today, or, some of our customers, what they've realized about Xero as you grow is that the GL stands up. The GL is what stands up as they grow and scale. It's these other tools and these other elements that are great out of the box solutions for a small business, but you begin to say, hey, I need a bit more from my payroll. I need a little bit more from my invoicing. I need some better controls around my spend management. And these other parts, which were never the core part, I think, of the Xero product, begin to, you bolt on more, I suppose, stronger or bigger business solutions around the general ledger. But yeah, I don't know if anyone's got any comments on that.
I was probably
I might say, oh, sorry, go ahead, Mitch.
All right, thanks, Laurel. I was actually going to piggyback on your comment, Laurel. So, when you get to that multi-entity level, I think some sort of organizations think it becomes quite complex to work in sort of multiple Xero files. And I think probably a complexity that we've seen at Syft is when it gets to the multi-currency state, where we've got maybe a couple organizations or a couple entities in Australia and a couple in New Zealand. How do we link those together? Or when it becomes multiple levels, it does become a bit complex. But as you're sort of saying, the ledger is sound. It's just these additional tools you can bolt on for the reporting or some data analytics, that type of thing. That's probably where I've seen sort of the biggest shift.
And something I forgot to mention as well for everyone tuning in, we've got the Q&A open, so feel free to pop questions in as we go. If we can answer them as we go, we will. Otherwise, we'll get to them towards the end of the session. So cool. No, thanks, Mitch, for adding that as well. And I think the multi-entity piece, multi-currency reporting is a big one, and people probably, or in a lot of cases, don't realize what they can achieve. So, I mean, Syft, you guys are now part of kind of the Xero world, so obviously a solution there. But the fantastic thing about I suppose the API and the ecosystem is that you've got options as well, depending on what your specific needs are. So now if we kind of go from this, when and why do they start questioning it? We've had a bit of a conversation around, where are those core elements? What are those core elements that drive the question? Is it still the right product for us? How can people go through, anyone who's tuning in now, how can they go through a process to figure out, is Xero still the right fit? And, if not, maybe an ERP is the answer, or, how do you actually determine that? And Laurel, this is your bread and butter, what you guys do. So I'd be curious to get your take on this question.
Yeah, sure. And I think it kind of relates back to what you were saying about getting bolt-ons for operations. I think that the finance teams have different drivers and reasons why they're going to be thinking about, have I outgrown Xero? But operations teams in the business, business owners, are going to have completely different drivers around getting the right reporting data around inventory, or it could be job and workflow management, or whatever industry they're in. So a big part of the discussion is often, firstly, addressing that it's not just the finance team, it's actually the whole of business coming together when you're having these conversations. And yes, the financial reporting has got to be right. And it's got to work for the finance team. But there are so many other stakeholders involved. So we always recommend, because it's very common, it's just the finance team will come and have a chat with us. We go, well, can we bring in the rest of those stakeholders in the business to be part of the conversation?
Yeah.
And then I guess from there, in terms of process, it's about laying it all out on the lawn, because often different people in different functions don't know what the other people are doing. So a big part of our process is helping businesses to look at what are all the processes that folks are doing from a finance and an ops and a marketing and productivity perspective in a business. And then sort of looking at what are the requirements that they have across all of those functional areas. And then only then can you start to think about, are we at that threshold of you've outgrown Xero and we need to look at an ERP, or are we really starting to just look at bolt-on apps?
I mean, and what's your perspective on the, I suppose, the argument or the decision around you know, is it in the best interest to, if you can stay on Xero as long as you can? Or should you be saying, look, we can see a world in a few years where we're going to need to move for whatever reason. So let's rip the Band-Aid off. Do you have a perspective on that? I've spoken to a few people who have shared theirs, but I'd be curious to get yours.
Yeah, look, I think generally, if you can keep the finance ledger the same and start to build out slowly some finance applications, and then work out additional operations applications on the Xero ecosystem, it's a much better way to go than jumping straight from a manual process, which is generally what businesses are doing. They've got information. We still work with lots of businesses where stuff is handwritten. If my team are on this call, they will laugh because we get a lot of handwritten information or an Excel. And it's really hard to go from that manual part to looking at an ERP because you haven't gone through that first iteration of unpacking your process and getting it into a standardized or a streamlined system.
No, that's great.
It's not to say you can't, but yeah, it's just in general.
And the questions come up, and maybe this is a good one, Andrew, for you and Mitch, given you're so close to the ecosystem side. So someone's asked, what common applications do businesses go to? You know, you've mentioned Approval Max. Obviously, Mitch, you work for Syft. So what should people know about extending the life of Xero and how to go about figuring out what those other tools might be to help them?
Do you want to jump in first, Mitch?
Yeah. I suppose I live in that like bolt-on world where, you know, Xero is that fundamental ledger, but I think the specific reporting or insights requirements that sort of Syft is catering towards is maybe the management reporting that's needed when you reach that multi-entity level. So, you know, bringing multiple balance sheets together, sort of looking at the consolidated figures alongside each business side by side, maybe understanding the operational dashboards of all of those entities sort of in one place and to see how each of those are performing. So the management reporting side really is the area that we ticking boxes. But yeah, there's a lot of custom reporting requirements that we try and cater towards. And I think working with Xero's API is a really fantastic way to get that deliverable. It's plug and play. It's easy to use, as a lot of the apps are in the ecosystem. You know, it's not a very complicated thing to get started. So yeah, I'd say explore a ton of different options, particularly in the reporting space. You know, there's a few available, but yeah, we do try and make the process as easy as possible to plug in multiple entities, run those reports, combine the chart of accounts. You know, a lot of it is easy to set up and quite quick and easy to run those reports and management outputs. So yeah, that's a Syft lens, I suppose.
Operationally, I know we're talking with CFOs here, but operationally, it sort of goes in a bunch of different directions. So if we, for example, I mentioned before, a common one is inventory or supply chain management, which Sin7 or Deer Inventory are fantastic applications and just honestly, just beasts of programs. They're so large and made me well aware of how much I don't know about inventory management. But if we go further down the path, if you're doing, e-commerce, we've got some great integrations with Shopify. You shouldn't be doing that directly through Xero. There's a whole bunch of really good front ends from an e-commerce perspective, which would not be appropriate inside Xero, and Xero won't scale well. I think the bit we're looking at here is if you're really on the limits of what we can handle with Xero at the start, we probably wouldn't recommend it because you can't grow with your business. So that's when you start to look at ERPs, other solutions. But that changes pretty regularly. If we look at the development of the last 3 or 4 years, and it's a pretty mature market, the world, this app marketplace around Xero, it's grown pretty significantly and it's still continuing to grow. So it's it is quite hard to keep on top of the various iterations, and Xero in Australia integrates with over 1,200 different applications. It is hard to say off the cuff, this is where we would go, but it really depends on the business you're working with. But we can sort of give some pointers. Another common one would be payroll, again, depending on the sophistication of the business. Xero's got a hard cap of 200 employees for payroll, and there's a stack of great apps that move beyond that 200 mark. And usually when you're dealing with 200 employees, there's a stack of other stuff you want to include, like whether you do some integrated bonus calculations or there's some other components you need in there. Once you get above 200, like, for example, Tanda does a great job in that world. There's a few that also do really good high employee. If you're doing like labor hire services, there's some very, very good programs in there too. So I'm not sure I'm actually answering the question or dancing around it, Jack, but it depends on the business you're in, which is the worst answer because depends isn't an answer. But Laurel, I'm not sure if there's any sort of examples you've got in terms of particular industries that you sort of point people towards.
Yeah, I'll probably, like going with what you said, Andrew, I'll probably caveat by saying we have a standard application stack with Xero that we use at RSM that we put a lot of time and consideration into testing and making sure that it works for most of our clients. So I can share that with everyone. But it's important to note too, we always will work into our process a selection and then validation or testing part of a project because you never know. There can be really weird and wonderful workarounds that need to happen. And I might go as a consultant, I might go, oh, it's no problem. Your team can just do that. But the finance team might go, no, that's a deal breaker for us. So you always want to make sure you're testing and really looking at the solution in practice before you make that final buying decision. That's important to say. But I'll just rattle off my kind of functional list here. So I've got on my list, we often are adding in an additional asset management system. So we work with Asset Accountant and Asset Guru. Accounts payable automation. So Dext, Approval Max, and Lightyear are fantastic and will help to build in the delegation of authority. HR and payroll, like you said, Tanda, Employment Hero are really popular. Month end, so we've got Mayday, reporting. And I think someone popped a great question in there about pulling trial balances or something. So Syft can do that. And then there's a whole bunch of great applications that can do extraction for data as well that you can consider. And then the other ones are just from a banking perspective, expense management and multi-currency management. So with expense management's built into a lot of applications, and we generally will use Airwallex for both expense management and multi-currency.
Cool.
Sorry, that was a big blah.
No, I mean, sometimes, I mean, I appreciate that it is very much business to business. Please, don't just roll out and implement all of those apps because Laurel said it. At the end of the day, though, it is helpful as a starting point to go from 1,200 apps down to 6 or 7 or 10 or whatever the number might be. I think if you've got nothing integrated with Xero at the moment, there's some really low-hanging fruit in that list, and the conversations we'll have over the course of this series will bring to light a few of the low-hanging fruit. Just tools that nearly every business at a certain scale and size will benefit from. And then you've got your more, I suppose, niche or industry-specific solutions too that are out there that you might need to go and explore a little bit deeper because you do get 3 or 4 of these products in the same space, and this one's going to work for a certain business that's trying to achieve a certain outcome. Something I will add, and Andrew, we were talking about this before the call started around that, what are the scenarios where an ERP pretty much hands down is going to be the way to go? And, we talk manufacturing, we talk construction as key areas. You mentioned, Andrew, you had a client with complex intercompany debtor arrangements and interest postings and all these kinds of things that, 5 years ago when they came across your desk, it was feel free to tell the story yourself, but things change in the ecosystem, I suppose, and problems that were once problems can sometimes, if you're now revisiting, new apps have come out, new solutions are in market. That's the value of the ecosystem. It's continuously evolving. So I don't know, Andrew, if you can shed some light on that story.
Yeah, so I met with a large, it's a national residential and commercial real estate agency, and they were expanding to other countries, and they were currently using a mid-tier ERP at the time, and they were looking at Xero. I was quite interested to have a chat. I was actually really interested to know about all the local offices, by the way, but ended up talking about the head office and their own operations. And I started asking some questions around what frustrations they have in the current system. And the system, look, it's a pretty good system they were using, but they had some issues around reporting. And the key issue of reporting they had was that a cross-border debt obligation that was dependent on profits. So it was kind of that tricky balance between equity and debt and a cross-border related party debt instrument, which is quite complex. The meeting went for about 15 minutes. It was really short because I straight away said, hey, look, That just that is not right for Xero. We're not going to be able to improve the reporting. And at that stage, there wasn't any tools in the market that could have really helped them in that world. And again, in a pretty short period of time, Mayday could definitely step in there and help now, especially with the intercompany reconciliation. In terms of the calculation, there's way more sophistication in the reporting tools that's available outside of Xero that you could bolt on. So you could probably handle that today if you could bolt some of those tools together and it worked for the business. But at that stage, it was a no. And even today, it's probably a line ball decision whether that's right or wrong, because I'm not sure the tools that were in place and Xero can grow with a company as that goes into multiple countries and continues to grow. So that's an example where we'd say, look, Xero's not right. We don't run Xero on Xero, for example. We're a listed multinational group. We would not be right for using Xero for our own finances. We're probably more an extreme example. Those edge cases, it ultimately comes down to where do you want to be in 2 or 3 years' time, and are you redlining the limits of the current program that you're on?
Yep. Yep. No, that's great. And I mean, there's another question's come through, Laurel. I might get your take on this because Kate's mentioned that looking at this can all be quite daunting. I would also add that I think any ERP implementation would probably be quite daunting as well. So I think that problem will persist if you're a growing business and you're facing new challenges. There's always going to be a little bit there. So I don't know if you've got any advice or suggestions for kind of how to handle or break this apart into smaller pieces.
Yeah, well, thanks, Kate, for asking that question. I think the good thing about it is that there's not much interdependency between if you're looking at it from just a finance perspective, there's not an interdependency between Syft and Mayday and Employment Hero and all the apps. So you can actually start to bolt things on as and when you're comfortable. And I think that goes back to what I said before about just laying everything out on the lawn a bit and getting buy-in from the team, getting an understanding around, okay, what's the subscription cost going to look like? What's the implementation cost? Because implementing Employment Hero payroll or Tanda payroll it can be a time-consuming process and much different than bolting on something like Dext, which you could do probably in an hour, right? So you got to lay it all out and look at how much effort is it going to be? How much disruption is it going to cause your team? The cost, implementation plan, and really kind of work as a team to identify what you're going to do and come up with that plan. But yeah, certainly we don't suggest doing too many things at once.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. And there's a couple more questions that we'll get to as part of the Q&A at the end. I just want to kind of keep the conversation moving. So with respect to the third dot point there on the screen, what real world stories are there of businesses who have scaled on Xero successfully? Because I think at the end of the day, it's all well and good for us to talk about you can do this hypothetically, and it's another thing to say like, look, no, there's actual businesses who have achieved great scale with Xero at the core. So I asked you all to kind of maybe come with an example in mind, a client in mind, or a customer in mind. So I mean, Mitch, I don't know if you've got a business that you guys work with at Syft that kind of stands out from your perspective as like a really good success story that didn't have any need to go to ERP and made it work with Xero.
Yeah, I think probably a couple examples come to mind. I think first one is sort of someone moving into like maybe franchising and working into like multi-entities for different locations or different entities that need their own sort of ABN or something along those lines. The idea in Syft is have the tools that a franchisor can look at all of those entities in one place and sort of like look at them all together. So, scaling in that model in like particularly the consolidation piece is one item and maybe the permissionings that's aligned there. But another interesting one that came across my desk was an NPO that had sort of multiple Xero files that they actually wanted particular donor reporting on. So they were thinking about moving up to an ERP, and the idea on our side was let's look at what all of these chart of accounts look like together. Let's see what we can break out, redesign, and restructure in terms of the reporting outputs, and really produce something that ticked all their boxes, not preventing, but just aligning the fact that they were not needing to move up and things weren't as complex as they were, putting to their head. So I think there's probably those two different examples that come to mind straight away, but there's a ton of other smaller opportunities that also take place. As you sort of pointed out in the poll there's some people from like a two entity to a five entity space, something that's a lot smaller where you can quite quickly and easily produce management reports for all of those organizations. Doesn't have to be too complex. It could just be multiple locations. But yeah, fantastically easy to get set up and actually work quite quickly and easily. So the 50 entities plus is definitely where bulk loads of time is saved, but there's also the smaller guys that really do find benefit in these apps and that you can add on.
No, very good shout. Thanks, Mitch. Andrew, do you have
Yeah, look, with
example?
Mitch, following from Mitch said, so I think of it more two different ones. I've got like a bottom-up approach, which is a retail food outlet, fast food outlet that was around the country. It had grown really quickly over a sort of 6 to 7 year period. And their head office, who was collating a lot of the information, I think their month end, because they used some consolidation tools, moved from something like 8 or 9 days to it would move down to hours. I think it was like 3 or 4 hours. So it was a huge change for them. And they also had real-time vision. They could see the progress of the stores mid-month. And because it took them so long before, it actually changed the way they operated their head office. And that was a really good case. They actually came from I'll call it a pretty low bar. It was a few years ago now. They had all the local like the local branches, if you like, the local restaurants on a whole variety of different software packages that weren't pulling information to the head office. So when the head office became a little bit more, they could mandate, if you like, what the local restaurant was doing. It made it so much easier for them to pull it in. But they were trying to also sell the benefit to that local store to say this is the information we can give you around benchmarking. So it was like a two-way discussion between the head office and the local store in terms of the benefits they could provide. The second one was a little bit more top down, where it was a property development group, and they had about 60 entities, and they had an issue where they were trying to allocate, overhead to each of their developments. They had about 60 developments, so like an entity per development. And that was taking them just forever because it was a lot of manual journals, calculations and journals to push that information across 60. So it started off when we were doing sort of 5 to 10 developments. It was okay to do that manually. It wasn't too much of a pain. But as they grew, that pain did not scale. It actually got worse and more painful. So it became a small problem into a full-time problem, a full-time person just doing these journals and calculations. So I think they ended up using Mayday in the end to do the intergroup transactions. And that saved them loads of time to the extent that I think they went from 5 headcount in their head office. And it's not great for the head office staff, but I think they went down to 3. They actually reduced by 2 headcount. I think they may have repurposed the staff rather than letting them go. But it made a massive change to the way that they saw the information. And in fact, in both those cases, it's not just a pure efficiency on the flow. It actually changed the way they analyzed information too. So because you've got this efficiency of data, the stuff that fell on the nice to have, or wouldn't it be great if we could do X with our information, all became possible because it was just far more transparency there.
Yeah, I've got some points on that, kind of the second order benefits, but Laurel, over to you. I don't know if you obviously work with some interesting businesses as well. So yeah, we'd love to hear what you've seen.
Yeah, and it's a real mix of industries. So I wouldn't say that there's any specific industry that I can point to that Xero and the ecosystem works best for. I guess that's important to highlight. I mean, whether it's agriculture, so we're currently working with like a big macadamia farming business to work through all of their entities and get some operational and finance efficiencies. We're working with a big dental group who has got intercompany loans dating back, I think, to the end of 2023. I hope they're not listening on this call. And it's going to save them a massive amount of time on their month-end close by moving on to the Xero ecosystem, because at the moment they're on a legacy system. We've worked with tugboat businesses, restaurant groups. I think probably the most important thing to note is that whenever we do a transition, it's real world stories, right? But it's also real people that you're working with. And these transitions can have a huge impact on finance teams. So probably rather than talking about the success of the outcome for the business, I'd rather focus on what's the success for the people in the finance teams and how do you set yourself up. I think obviously coming onto a webinar like this and getting informed on the applications is one part. But I also think what helps these businesses to be really successful is having those great internal champions who really grab hold of everything and are willing to put their hand up and learn and take ownership over the finance and sometimes some of the operations processes and make it happen with that change management process. Because at the end of the day, apps are only going to get you so far. It's people that need to understand what they're doing, and finance teams that need to put new standard operating procedures in place to be successful. I don't know if that helps.
Yeah, no, that absolutely does. And no, I 100% agree with you. I think some of the biggest success stories that we've seen, Scafidi Pharmacy Group is a really great example. One of the first Adelaide customers we were, I'm Adelaide based, and they basically were spending 4 or 5 days a month just doing their intercompany recharges. They had commercial reasons for needing to purchase things out of a centralized entity and running into a whole bunch of challenges with that. So, but independently, each of the pharmacies was a simple business. It didn't need a complicated accounting system. It just needed, I suppose, a little bit better connectivity between them. So, that was a great example. And I think throughout the customers that we work with, we get these questions from people like, oh, at what turnover or what number of employees, like we kind of discussed, but those metrics aren't really the reason why you'll work with Xero or you won't work with Xero. I think if you sell trains and trains are, $250 million a pop and you sell 4 trains a year, you're $1 billion turnover company, but you can use Xero. So I think it's one of those things where it's not so much a metric or something that determines if Xero is going to work for you. But once you find that it will work for you, then there's some really fantastic outcomes that have been there. And yeah, saving a finance team 4 or 5 days every month, or to Andrew's point, turning month end from 8-9 days into hours, improves the reporting, improves the decision making. It allows that whoever that was who drove that project, that finance manager, that head of finance, that CFO, to play more of a strategic role in the business. So, it is a super valuable thing from the individual's perspective as well. Yeah, as you say, the apps only do, we play a role, and that's it's much more about the people. So yeah, great call out, Laurel. So on that note, maybe we can kind of wrap things up and answer a few questions that we've got here. So look, Andrew, this one's directed to Xero. So how does Xero plan to integrate or leverage AI in the product? Any upcoming planned features to expect there? Look, I know you guys have Jax. I don't know if there's more you can talk to about that. And I don't know if this person's familiar with that, but yeah, I don't know if there's anything you want to say.
Yeah, sure. And the sort of I'll sort of talk to the 3 options or 3 areas we've got AI in terms of Xero strategy going forward, the 3 areas we're focusing on. So the first one is trying to streamline repetitive and time-consuming tasks to help you sort of run your business more efficiently. And some great examples of that, which are already in the program, this is not new, we've been doing it for a while, is at the moment we can provide automatic bank reconciliation predictions. So we'd look at the way, for example, BP would be coded, and then we would pre-suggest based on what's inside your chart of accounts, it's probably going to be motor vehicle expenses. And that's quite hard to do. It requires a lot of information. We don't just look at the way people code, we also look at the changes the accountant makes to get a better or a more accurate coding, if you like. There's some other stuff we do in terms of our help and support articles where we use AI, but that's the sort of stuff we've already got in the program, if you like, artificial intelligence, which is really a sophisticated version of trend analysis and trying to predict what that will do in the future. The next stage will be providing the right insights at the right time, and that's to help you make sort of better decisions. Syft is a big part of that. That's actually quite difficult to give you insights as to what you want about your specific business, your industry, what's right for you, is where we'll take AI next. I'll go into the third bit in a second, but Mitch, is there anything that you want to talk about in terms of the AI that's inside Syft, in terms of doing some predictive analytics like cash flow forecasting and so on?
Yeah, I think probably I'll have my own little threefold here. I think Syft is also working in like a 3-part sort of thought process here. The first part's obviously, when we bring in multiple entities worth of data, or this multi-entity world or consolidation space, how do you analyze that? How do you pick up trends? How do you surface anything that might be going on? Syft has our own Syft Assist, which is trying to look at that underlying data and surface anything that's can identify trends or work out what's going on within each of those businesses. So it is about the data you feed it, but just trying to surface insights and give you better takeaways. Secondly is probably the cash flow side of things, as you mentioned. It's looking at, historical transactions or debtor and creditor behaviors and trying to identify, when cash should be coming in or could be going out. So doing that on a multi-entity level is also saving a boatload of time and sort of cash management. And then the last tier in terms of maybe the day-to-day and a little bit of the proactive insights is, what transactions are uncommonly large, or are the volume of transactions hitting limits, those types of things, trying to, alert you of anything that's going out or summarizing certain events that have taken place, that type of thing. So yeah, a lot in Syft and also working at that multi-entity sort of space on the consolidation world.
Yeah. Sorry, Andrew. Go.
I was going to say, and the final thing, so if you like, for that's the automating the repetitive tasks, delivering the insights, which is a big part of our strategy with having Syft on board. And the next part's, if you like, I'll call it the hype curve or the sexy part, which is introducing more conversational interfaces. So this is generative AI, where it starts to feel like you're dealing with a human inside Xero. Trust me, it is just an algorithm, but really having a conversational basis. You can ask Xero via a variety of different means a certain natural language question, like who owes me money? And then Xero will come back to you with a list of who your most what's your highest invoices, and you can ask certain questions about, do you want to apply a late fee? You can say yes or no. Can you please update this invoice? But you can also do certain other things with Jax or Just Ask Xero, which is currently in beta right now. Is instead of being formally inside the program, it's designed to be on the road. So not necessarily for CFOs, but say you're a tradesman or you're on the road somewhere else, and you can send it an email, or if you have an email from a customer, you forward the email to Jax and say, can you draft an invoice based on these customer details? Or you can send it an SMS, or you can send it a WhatsApp message. And we're moving to a world where you can send it a voice command. So it's many more ways of interacting, not just through the regular Xero program, through our traditional apps that we've got, like in the Android and iOS app, and also the desktop version. So Jax is that next phase, if you like. It's more designed around operations of the business versus the financial management right now, but this is like the starting point. In terms of generative AI, it does seem amazing. We're certainly at the peak of the hype curve right now. It is really early days. It takes a lot of information and a lot of questions, but it's only going to get more and more accurate. So we're keen to see that take off in the next few years. I think it'll take a few years before it's absolutely incredible. It's already working today, but it'll take time before that becomes if you like, a digital assistant inside Xero for you. And that's where we're looking to take AI going forward.
Yeah, I think it's good to call out the two or multiple elements, because sometimes when we talk about AI, we can be led in different directions depending on what people's assumption of what that looks like is. And I think because we're all using ChatGPT or equivalents at the moment, that seems to be kind of when's that coming? And that's more of that Jax experience you're talking about, versus sometimes the AI is kind of embedded in the technology itself. And I know that for Mayday, we've just launched our deferred revenue and prepayments products, and so we've trained our own AI to basically check out the bills and invoices and determine the release schedules off the back of those. So it can be sometimes a little less, you're not chatting with something necessarily, it's just the technology and the smarts behind the scenes. So I might just hold on questions just for a second, just because we're right on time. We'll hang around though, if you guys can, for another few minutes. I'll just roll through quickly kind of what's coming up as part of the series over the next 5 webinars. So tomorrow, for those of you who have registered, or if you haven't yet, feel free to jump back onto the Scaling with Xero site and register. We've got solving inventory for product-based businesses. So Sin7's coming along to that, which Andrew called out a little bit earlier. We've got Lauren, who's kind of gone through the process of implementing that, and Jeff, who's a bit of a guru when it comes to inventory rollouts. We've then got next week on Tuesday, managing multi-entity and month end. So that's, obviously a little bit of a Mayday flavor to that, but great people coming along, finance leaders, as well as kind of advisors. So come and join the conversation there. And then we've got automated consolidated reporting with data sites, which is another app in this space, more Excel driven insight, I suppose, and connecting to different tools. So just always the power of the Xero ecosystem is you've got options there. And then we finish off with optimizing global payments with Airwallex on Tuesday, the 26th of August. So if you're coming to one or multiple or many of these, we're looking forward to catching up and continuing the conversation. We'll go deeper on a bunch of this stuff that we've started today. And then if you happen to be Brisbane based or heading up to XeroCon, we're actually going to be putting on a few drinks Monday, 1st of September at the Plough Inn. So come along. There's a QR code there if you want to scan it and register. Appreciate not everyone's Brisbane based. I appreciate also not everyone has Monday nights free. And I also appreciate that not everyone's was able to get a ticket to XeroCon because it sold out so quickly. So if you can't make it, totally understand. But if you can, would be great to see you there. It's obviously our shout. So on that note, I'll leave that up and just check out the remaining questions quickly. So what do we have? I think there were a few more. So there was a good one about, oh, where's my Q&A? My question's gone, sorry. There we go. When looking at your tech stack, what options do people have to basically get help with that? So, Laurel, appreciate your role as kind of an external advisor to this. They're asking in particular, does Xero provide support? I suppose, yeah, what's your suggestions there, Andrew, and maybe Laurel, you can share what might be different about working with someone like yourself or your team.
In terms of our standard situation, no, we don't offer support in that directly. We rely on a partner network to help with that, and that's where we work closely with like Laurel on the phone call here. I think the hard bit to find with these recommendations is finding a combination of knowledge that's both accounting and tech. So I think you can find one on either side, but bring it together in a stack like this, which is what Mayday is doing, which is a great idea. It is a little harder to navigate that specifically for your business, so we do rely on consultants to do that. We just don't have the skills internally and don't have the we haven't done the long-term implementations because we rely on a partner network for implementations too. So Laurel, probably you're the right person here to speak to, but that's where we recommend. We don't do it internally.
Oh, sorry, you're on mute.
You're on mute, Laurel.
Thanks. It's a bit the same. We often are recommending our clients at RSM to go and talk to the partner network as well, because so many vendors do an amazing job giving demonstrations, helping talk clients through complex workflows and understand like what could be possible for them. I think it's a little bit of a double-edged sword just to call out, because obviously when you're talking to a specific vendor, they want to make a sale for their product. And it can be a bit of a what's the saying? Round peg, square hole situation. So you always have to have your kind of agnostic hat on as a finance person when you're undertaking that exercise. But it's a really great free way to get information. Did you have anything to add to that, Mitch? Like you just do demos, right?
Yeah, I suppose we try and take on that type of functionality where it's like, we can cover all of these things. But to your point, Lawrence, if you're asking the right questions, you're going to get, the correct feedback for your requirements from that demonstration. And probably our suggestion when it comes to, looking at these apps and working through, all of the options available, the Xero Marketplace is actually a great place to start when looking at like the top rated apps and like the highly reviewed apps. I think that's probably a great place to start. And the search filter in there is fairly advanced. So if you search for something like payroll or something along those lines, it's going to spit out all the apps that fit in that space and you can work through that. So that would probably be my recommendation. Go by good reviews and what Xero is recommending as well.
Awesome, guys. And my only addition to that would be that, the CFO Tech Stack site that I've linked in the chat there, which is CFO Tech Stack's what's, the community that's putting this series on. So you may already be part of it, but for softer elements, I suppose, maybe not like direct advice, consulting kind of services, but if you're kind of doing that initial research yourself, there's a weekly newsletter, so you can follow that. Good content. We usually do a How I Stacked It article every week as well. So that's a finance leader sharing their tech stack, why they implemented certain solutions, what they use it for. So that can kind of be quite useful. And we've got a whole library of those on the site now. So you can probably dig through a bunch of them to see what the common tools are and what people are saying about them. You've got the app market map on there as well. So they're kind of some of the core tools that might just cut through the noise a little bit. You've also got access to the Slack forum in there if you actually want to jump in and ask other finance leaders what what they're doing, or if you've got some specific use case or question, sometimes someone who's implemented themselves in a similar business will have some good answers for you. So I think there's levels to this. There's the DIYs, there's the go do some research yourself, there's the app stores, then there's more, I suppose, in-depth consulting advice, help with implementations, that kind of stuff, depending on where you're at and what help you need. So yeah, thanks, Lucy. Glad you enjoy the how I stacked it. Sorry. But yeah, I think on that note, guys, I believe we've answered everybody's questions. And thank you all for hanging around. Really appreciate you all taking the time. Hope that was useful, valuable to some degree, because I know your time is hard to get. So yeah, thanks again. Thanks, Andrew. Thanks, Mitch. Thanks, Laurel. Thank you all for coming. And yeah, hopefully we'll see you on another session soon. Cheers.
Thanks, Jack.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you all. Bye.